Without a doubt, the most popular style of beer in the United States is light lager. With its crisp mouthfeel, subtle aroma, and arguably absent flavor, it's easy to see why this style has garnered the love of so many. Known for their deliciously rich lager history, the brewers in Germany fairly recently began crafting versions of their tasty pilsners that packed a little bit less guilt. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and my co-host today is Brülosophy's newest contributor, Phil Rusher, who will be chatting with me about German Leichtbier.
You pronounced it correctly. It is not Leichtbier.
Which I've been guilty of saying, actually.
Yeah, I think I'd be lying if I said I never pronounced it that way, too.
Yeah, no, I still kind of find myself messing up, and I had to put a little reminder in the show notes here, spelling it out phonetically for me so I didn't screw up on it. But it is Leichtbier, and my understanding is that Leicht in German just means light, basically in the way that we would, describe like a light beer, right?
Yeah, imagine that.
Well, dude, it's great having you on board as the newest Brülosophy contributor. How has your experience been with that so far?
It's been really rad, actually. I really enjoy making beer, and I really enjoy being able to contribute to our community, and being able to hang out with you guys and bounce ideas off each other has just been tremendous past couple months. So
it's great having you on board, and I love how you hit the ground running by brewing a short and shoddy version of this delicate style as your first thing for Brülosophy. Brave man you are. Well, I want to let everyone know about a really rad deal on the 2019 BYO Boot Camp happening March 22nd and 23rd in Asheville, North Carolina. Brew Your Own has set up a special code for fans of Brülosophy to get $125 off the registration price. That's a pretty damn good deal. I'm going to be joining forces with Denny Kahn and now Drew Beecham of Experimental Brewing for 2 full-day homebrew experimentation workshops, and I'd love to see you there. There are also 15 other workshops scheduled during those 2 days to round out your experience in the craft beer hotbed of Asheville. Register by January 22nd at byobootcamp.com and use coupon code BYOBootcampBrülosophy to save $125 off of registration. Again, killer deal, and we'd love to see you out there. We want to remind those of you who live around any of us to reach out so that we can get you involved as a participant. We've got contributors in Anchorage, Alaska, Chicago, Illinois, Denver, Colorado, Atlanta, Georgia, Fresno, California, and now, thanks to Phil, Auburn, New York. My twin brother, a lot of people may not know that I have a twin. He lives in Buffalo, and I know, what's that, like 2 hours, 3 hours from you, Phil?
Yeah, something like that. It's a bit of a hike.
Bit of a hike, but still closer than I am. I'll have to hook you guys up sometime. He homebrews as well. So, but if you're interested in participating and you live near us, you can email me, Marshall@Brülosophy.com, and I will connect you with the contributor closest to you. If you like what we're doing and you want to help us to keep doing it, head over to Brülosophy.com/support and use the links that you find there when you do your online shopping. You can also receive rewards in return for your support by becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Rewards include things like access to the Brew Crew private forum, unpublished recipes, and discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com. For a pledge of just $3 a month, you'll be invited to attend a monthly live Q&A session with some really cool folks. Coming up this month is Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, inventor of the famed Pliny the Elder Double IPA, and an all-around cool dude. We've got Annie Johnson from Pico Brew and John Kimmich from The Alchemist scheduled as well. On top of all of that, patrons pledging at the $5 level or higher are entered into a monthly drawing for a $50 gift certificate from our friends at lovetobrew.com. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch and have a bunch of awesome strains to choose from. I've been digging hard on their L17 Harvest. I've been talking about it a lot as well. It's a lager strain that works awesome, fermented cool or warm, and I'm really excited to try out their new A43 Loki strain that can be fermented as warm as 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 37 degrees C. Crazy stuff. You can check out all that they have to offer at imperialyeast.com and pick up some for yourself at More Beer and Great Fermentations. Okay, Frank Osborne shot me some feedback recently that I thought would fit nicely with this episode. He says, I wanted to share a story from a competition I was judging last weekend. Between flights, 2 master judges were sitting there talking about a flight of light lagers that I took part in judging. They were really all bad. I can attest to that. But they were blaming Brülosophy for encouraging people to brew lagers more at higher temps. Then one of the judges said the classic line everyone says, quote, "You might not be able to tell the difference in a warm lager, but I could. I almost laughed when I heard it. I ended up defending you guys by saying you state all of your experiments that this is in no way You state in all of your experiments that it's no way definitive and that at least you're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Phil, as the new guy, what are your thoughts on this judge saying that we're to blame for bad lager beer?
I think that is a bold statement. Probably not the case, but yeah, I guess I can kind of understand where he's coming from, though, because Dogma tells us that there is a strict fermentation range for these lager strains that we use, and if we don't adhere to those temperature ranges, then bad things happen. But
right.
I think we've kind of shown that's not always the case, at least. Probably not the case most of the time. Yeah.
So, my first thought is that everyone needs a scapegoat, and I'm perfectly happy to be that judge's scapegoat. Whatever, I don't care.
Totally.
But you know what I mean? And the truth is, I have been judging beer longer than I've been fermenting lager warm, and I have judged flights of lager beers that were utter shit. And you can't blame that on me. You can't blame that on Brülosophy. And so, to pinpoint it down to that, I just think is so naive. And no offense if the judge is listening to this right now, I doubt he is based on the comment. But
right.
I think it's silly. It's fun to laugh at. I'm perfectly fine again with people blaming us for that, and I could defend what we're doing. First off, I'm not encouraging anybody to go out and do what I do. I just talk about what it is that I do, and it's been successful for me. We've had a lot of people in the brew club who are fermenting lagers warm and winning awards with those, and that must mean they're bad judges then, right? So, anyways, I think there's an evolution happening right now in our understanding of brewing and beer. And for me, it's exciting and fun. And I get that some people, the traditionalists out there may not like it. But I appreciate the feedback, Frank. If you have any show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320. So just a few years ago, it seemed like Belgian styles were really popular among homebrewers, though I've never been the biggest fan myself, especially when there are actual spices added to it. Just not my thing. Well, homebrewer Elvar Bjarkson made a spiced Belgian dark strong and sent in a couple bottles in search of some quality feedback.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Nice head on it.
It's an IPA. I mean,
Is
come
it?
on, you know it is.
I don't think it is.
Uh-oh.
A little wheat smell. I don't get much.
Wheat smell. That's something you've never offered.
Apparently it's wrong by Marshall's giggling.
What does wheat smell like, Tim?
Wheat.
It's a little like toasty.
Toasted wheat. You're drinking cereal.
Well, listen here.
Oh, yeah. It's oh, God, you actually stuck it.
Probably
I
not.
hate when you're right.
Which is hardly ever.
Ooh, wow. Okay.
It's
First
good.
of all, I love it.
I do like it too.
Second of all, I'm going to get to the bottom of what's...
It's not an IPA at all.
No, of course not. But it looked the color of one at least.
It
But he gave
did.
me that.
It
I
did.
know he's going to
I'll give
eventually
you that.
serve us an IPA.
Yeah.
Wow, that is delicious.
It is very good.
Ah, man, I don't know what it is.
Oh.
I don't know. I have no idea what it is. I don't know much, but I know how to like it. And that may be all there is to know. Dude, I would drink a couple of these, if not more.
got
This
kind
is
of a-
delish,
Like a
dude.
Jack Daniels oaky taste.
No, it doesn't at all, but
No?
that was good. That was good input. I liked it.
Then what are you tasting there?
I taste exactly what you said in the beginning. Like a toasty,
Yeah.
toastiness. Like
No, but it has something else besides toast. It has like
no,
that.
there it is. It's obviously there's a lot of shit going on in there, but it's very delicious. It's like a barley wine latte. It's like a light barley
Yeah.
wine.
That's incredibly impressive that you said that.
That's delicious, man.
Yeah, so barley wines are usually in the 10 to 13 or 14%.
I think
this is
this is
8.5% ABV. Let me read to you what our friend Elvar Bjarkson.
My heart's on fire for Elvar.
Let me read to you what he wrote about this. He says, "My name's Elvar, and I'm a homebrewer from Worcester, Massachusetts."
Worcester.
Worcester.
It looks like Worcester, but I'll say Worcester.
Worcestershire
I'm a big
sauce.
fan of the Brülosophy podcast. Thank you, Elvar. And usually listened to it during my hour-long commute into Boston, where I work. I began homebrewing a couple years ago and quickly upgraded to a 5-gallon all-grain system. I recently made an attempt at a cardamom spiced Belgian dark strong ale.
We were way off.
And was
like a
surprised to
spiced rum.
find that I could detect little or no cardamom in the finished beer. Instead, the beer has a strong anise character. Anise tastes like black licorice, and I can't find that very. I I've had a few drinks that I can't very well explain. I'm thinking possibly biotransformation, since it was added in the kettle rather than post fermentation. In any case, I consider myself an amateur brewer, so quote, constructive criticism is always welcome. Since I always enjoy Jersey and Tim's reactions to strange and unusual beers, I thought I would send you a couple of bottles.
I think it's good.
No, it's not strange and unusual. It's delicious.
How they like it. Do you guys get anise? Do you guys get that
I
licorice?
don't know.
I get more
Cold
like a
fusion?
spice, like a spice rum kind of.
So do I.
maybe.
So do I.
Yeah,
when you
it's good.
when you said it tastes like an aged Jack Daniels type of, that's what I get as well. Kind of an oaky.
It's really good, man.
Yeah, it's not a bad beer. It's surprisingly not bad.
I've had a lot worse.
When I read this description originally, when he emailed me, and I mean no offense, Elvar, I was like, oh shit, I'm probably not going to like this, but it's way better than I expected. I don't taste cardamom, which is he only put looks like 0.25 grams, which is nothing.
I was thinking,
What is it, cardamom? No, it's a pullover, but thanks for asking.
Tic Tac, sir. Yeah. So, anyways, it looks like a great malt bill. He used 5% candy sugar.
Of course, yeah.
A blend of two different yeasts, WLP 530 and WLP 500.
Cold fusion. It was put in a centrifuge for 3 hours. It's delish.
It's very good.
I like it a lot.
What do we got?
Oh, I'll give it 8
Yeah, I was gonna go 7
for a total of 13.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Not a beer I'd order more than one of, but as far as spiced Belgian ale goes, I'd have to say this was one of the better ones that I've had. Obviously well made. I'm just, again, it's you could give me the best made spiced Belgian ale ever, and I'm not gonna be a huge fan of it. I just kind of have this thing with spices and beer and highly phenolic beers in general. So, do you have any experience with beers like this, Phil?
I've used I made one beer using cardamom once. And that was like maybe a year and a half ago. And the cardamom was not subtle, and it was just crazy. It was undrinkable. It was a drain pour. Like I couldn't get rid of it.
Was it did you do it with a Belgian yeast, or was it some other type of?
Yeah, no, it was actually Napoleon from Imperial, and it was a Saison. It was not drinkable.
Yeah. Well, I've never done it. I'm probably never going to do it, but I do appreciate Elvar sending it in. If you want a beer or any other fermented beverage that you make or feel like sending in to be reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, email me, Marshall@Brülosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. We'll be right back with talk about German Leichtbier. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brülosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew in a bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
As is almost certainly the case with most current beer styles, German brewers have been making lower alcohol versions of classic pale lagers for a long time, serving them as basically a water substitute in the fields for field workers or at the dinner table. But my understanding is that it wasn't until recently that it sort of became a proper style.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. As long as people have been making beer, there probably have been versions of this light style beer. But as far as an official style goes, it's a pretty recent development.
It sort of makes me think of the table beer concept for Saison, in Wallonia, in that area, that they were making these beers that were a little bit perhaps healthier than water, from the wells and whatnot, and serving them to field workers or having a bottle of it at the table. That, what little research I could find on German Leichtbier is that, even kids would sip off of these really low alcohol, light pale lagers that they were putting on the table.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, having access to clean water these days is a luxury that many of us take for granted. And these people back then in these places in Europe did not have that. So that was actually like the safest one of the safest alternatives to, contaminated drinking water.
Yeah. I love it. I love that this thing that we all love so much, and that we kind of we do kind of take for granted the fact that we've got these delicious beers at our disposal pretty much any time. But it all kind of stemmed from people just trying to survive. I think we talked about that before on the show.
For sure.
So when it comes to German Leichtbier, now in the 2008 BJCP guidelines, this was not a style that was there. It was kind of introduced in the 2015 guidelines.
Yeah.
Basically, what it seems like is that the structure behind this beer or this beer style kind of they put it together and they said, all right, let's make this thing its own style. We can talk about it, and really, in my mind, when we do that kind of thing, it's kind of happening with New England IPA right now as well. The reason we do that, or the benefits that come from doing that, is we now have some sort of a goalpost. We have something that we can use and refer to when it comes to evaluating these beers, and then even brewing these beers. You kind of have this organized list of things that you do or what to expect with this particular style.
Yeah, and it could be hard to pin down for these new styles at first, like exactly like you said with any IPA. It's sort of the new kid on the block.
It'd be foolish for us to ignore what the real influence for this style was.
So the real influence for this style actually happens to be the American light lagers. Some people like to refer to them as the fizzy yellow water. But these German versions tend to be a bit more flavorful and a bit more palatable, I guess you can say.
Why is that? Again, the information that's out there about Leichtbier, at least that I could find, is pretty limited. And, based on what I could find, it seems like the main reason for that is just that maybe they're not relying on adjunct as much when they're making this beer. And just to get it out there, I really do think that the majority of German Leichtbier that is being made is by the big breweries of Germany. I mean, at least as of yet, it's not like a hugely popular home brewer style of beer.
Yeah, it probably could be a result of not using adjuncts. And I guess we can't really talk about Germany and German beer without talking about the Reinheitsgebot. So
that it's just a lack of that adjunct sugar that we know is being used, whether it's rice or corn or whatever it might be. My understanding, at least, is that these German breweries are producing all malt for the most part beers, which probably does contribute to having a little bit more full flavor.
Yeah, and who knows? And I'm not sure if they do any of the diluting that the American breweries do.
Yeah, either am I. That's I hadn't even considered that actually, and it would make sense that they might. I mean, water is definitely a part of the Reinheitsgebot, so they could do that.
And it's the more efficient way to brew as well. So I would think that they might, but who knows? It could be a factor as well.
Yeah. Well, I've had the opportunity to taste, I think, a total of 2 German Leichtbiers at this point. One of them was made by our friend Jake Freshour from up in Portland, Oregon. He actually sent one in for Jersey and Tim to review, and thankfully he sent 2 bottles because it was absolutely delicious. And it sort of got me hung up on wanting to brew these more often myself. So in terms of the style description, we've got what the BJCB puts out there, but I think honestly, if you just consider your typical, Bud Miller Coors Light, it's going to have a lot of the same stuff going on, but with a German spin, right? So in terms of appearance, it should be pale yellow and crystal clear,
For sure.
Bubbles coming up from the bottom of the glass type of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In any homage to German styles, it's got to be bright. It's got to be yellow in this case. and spicy, and I guess more malt forward and hop forward than our American light lagers.
Yeah, I think where in my experience, I've yet to buy like a Bitburger Light, which I've seen on the shelves at my local Bevmo. But I have had homebrewed versions, and that's it, where they really start to depart from these American light lagers, which I am not ashamed to admit I enjoy quite a bit. But where they really start to depart, I think, is particularly in terms of the aromatic qualities and to some degree the flavor. But I feel like the German Leichtbiers that I've had really do have the essence of a German Pilsner, and I think that comes from the types of hops that are being used. And, you got your typical German noble hops, things like Tettninger, the Hallertau hops, Mittelfrüh, stuff like that. And I really feel like that adds such depth to this style of beer, despite it being in the 3%-ish alcohol range.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most of that actually has to do with just process, being able to make a well-made beer, right? You can have the best ingredients, best yeast, best everything, but if your process sucks, then your beer's gonna suck.
In terms of the good homebrewed versions I've had, absolutely. But I absolutely agree that if you're not good, especially with sanitation and at least brewing beer consistently, you're not going to produce a good tasting homebrewed version of it. Those noble hops, though, compared to the American hops that are often used in American light lagers by these BMC, the big breweries, they add a more spicy component. I don't know how I get like a spicy floral blend from one of my favorite hops of all time, Tettninger, that I feel, like I said, really just adds something to this style of beer.
Yeah, for sure. And another one is Zatz. People use Zatz a lot for these German lagers. That's kind of my go-to variety for this style.
Yeah, great. It's another great hop as well. Or there are definitely some American hops that I've could imagine working really well. Something like I believe Mount Hood would probably work really well in a German Leichtbier if you don't have access to German noble hops. But another component obviously is the malt, and for the most part, the recipe that I have seen for a German Leichtbier was, I believe, 100% continental, German Pilsner malt,
Totally.
And I think that it's well known to produce a bready, crackery flavor that you may not get from domestic or, American grown malt, I guess. So at least that's the belief. So that adds more of that depth as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm actually curious to see how like something, a 6-row malt, say, would do with this, but I guess we have commercial examples of that everywhere.
Well, that's a good point. We, in America, it's well known that the big breweries are relying on 6-row malt, which we've shown does seem to, in an experiment, that it does seem to impart different flavor characteristics as compared to 2-row. And so it, perhaps there is that difference that a 6-row malt is. I mean, I tend to think that it's going to be or create a different flavor impression than continental Pilsner malt.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really see it not doing that, but I
Right.
guess we will have to do another experiment to find out.
on a German Leichtbier, actually, I think would be great. So again, and I think just to round this out in terms of mouthfeel, you're expecting that same really light, crisp, just light body that's easy to drink.
Yeah, need that fizzy yellow, man. Just keep it coming.
I know.
Gotta be really drinkable.
Carbonate the hell out of it. Make it just, I love it. I am, whatever. Throw your hate at me, but I just love this style because it's easy to drink and in my opinion, really quite delicious. Well, in terms of brewing it, not only is it a lager beer, which a lot of people kind of view as being more difficult or requiring a little bit more care, but it's a pale lager of low ABV, so very little to hide behind.
For sure, yeah. What we need to start is just that good continental Pilsner malt, and then those good noble hops. Pretty much any of them will do. And then from there, you just want to have the appropriate water profile. And in Germany, it's pretty soft. I mean, it's probably not quite as soft as the water they might have in Pilsen, but it's definitely less mineral content than most water sources.
I've actually found, and this is just a personal preference thing, the whole regional water argument. I think Martin Brungard has talked about a lot. They were adjusting their water as well, so it's kind of difficult to say,
right.
Just because Pilsen had this super soft water, which we actually know that they use soft water. I get that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every brewer or every brewer of good Pilsner beer wasn't adjusting their water. They were, that's a part of the brewing process. So one of the things that I've come to when it comes to making Pilsner-esque type of beers, and I tend to prefer the sharper, crisper, slightly more bitter German Pilsner over the Bohemian Pilsner, is I actually will use like a pale ale water profile. So higher sulfate to chloride, to kind of create that impression of crispness, which I think for this style works really well, right? Because you want it to be light, crisp, and easily drinkable.
Yeah, absolutely. I would for me personally, I would stay away from these crazy 500 parts per million additions of sulfate that some people do for pale ales. But yeah, no, I think you're right on there.
Well, one of the I was talking with Jake about really high sulfate, and he, one of the experiences that he's had, I think it was Jake, I might be wrong about this, but one of the experiences that he had with a super highly dosed, gypsum beer that he made, I think it was a pale lager, is that it really did, in a sulfate, it did seem to leave behind kind of a residual sulfur characteristic, which isn't all too uncommon or out of place if it's subtle enough in a pale, lager beer. So, and that maybe that's part of what I enjoy about using a higher sulfate, and I don't perceive it as that kind of farty sulfur thing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I've never tried to make a beer like that, but I'd be curious to see what kind of sulfur he was detecting, if it was just like eggs or like you said, farts or whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Well, and lager yeast is definitely known for kind of producing sulfur as well, and when combined with that sulfate, I could see it kind of leaving some behind. But either way, the pale lager mash schedule. I mean, there are multiple things you can do to increase that fermentability. I think some people would typically and traditionally probably employ a step mash. At the very least, stopping at 2 steps or something like that. And if you're going to do a single infusion mash, I'm in my experience making light beers, American light lagers. I've yet to make a Leichtbier. You're gonna mash that really low, maybe around 149, 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and mash it for a good 60 to 90 minutes. The idea being that you want to encourage as much conversion as possible, and rely on that beta amylase to really break down those starches into to create a very fermentable wort. From there, you collect that wort in your boil kettle, and kind of following traditional lager brewing practices, you got to boil that stuff for 90 minutes. And especially
if
when
not 2 hours, right?
Not 2 hours. I think that's going a little too far, Phil. Yeah. But and usually, I think one of the reasons a lot of people when they're making these more traditional German style lagers, that longer boils, you see that. I don't think necessarily it's just to drive off DMS, which is something you'll read about commonly. I think it's because a lot of those noble hops that people are using for these, they might be making a beer that only has one of those noble hops. Well, those are pretty low in alpha acid.
Yeah, I got to get that bitterness in there.
Exactly. And, you get, so in order to do that, you might first wort hop with, an ounce or two for a 5-gallon batch of something that's in the 3% alpha acid range. And if you're boiling for 90 minutes, ostensibly you are going to increase the IBU due to that boil length. It's a function of boil length at the very least. And then from there, the wort, once the boil is complete and all of your hop additions are made, my understanding for Leichtbier is you're looking at like 1 or 2 hop additions, definitely nothing in the dry hop or nothing too late in the boil. It's not like you're trying to make a hoppy Pilsner. You're really trying to make a balanced, malt hop balanced type of beer that's easy to drink.
Yeah, you want to walk that fine line between, really hop forward flavor and aroma, but you want to dial it back just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want it to be unique, I think, from a classic American light lager. And the hops, I believe, really do contribute to that uniqueness. And so it's just kind of that balance of where do you want to throw those in. I'd probably go with something like a 15-minute addition, maybe half ounce to a full ounce, depending on the pungency of the hops that I'm using at the time. Mm-hmm. But then once that wort's done, you chill it. You chill it as quickly as possible. Get a good cold break, and then based on the Narcissus and Noonan approaches, what you would typically do is allow that wort to settle, all of the trub from that wort to settle out, get nice and clear. Some people will even rack the wort to a fermenter, let it chill there, and then transfer that really nice clear wort into a second fermentation vessel before they actually oxygenate and pitch their yeast.
Yeah, so after you chill it down, all you want to do is select your favorite lager strain.
Now, consideration here, pitching temp is very important. I've read, traditionally that you want to get that wort a couple of degrees Fahrenheit cooler than where you actually plan to ferment it at. Now, being a traditional lager beer, that might be as low as, 46 degrees Fahrenheit, which I believe is 7 to 8 degrees Celsius. Pitch a nice, huge pitch of yeast, which on the homebrew scale at the very least, that means you're either pitching a couple of packs of yeast or propagating that yeast in a starter.
Typically, when you're making, starting gravity of 1050, you're going to want somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 billion yeast cells. But in the case of a Leichtbier, it's probably going to be significantly less than that. Off the top of my head, I think something starting at maybe 1035 might call for 200 billion-ish cells.
In terms of yeast strains, we're looking at a traditional, Pastorianus lager strain. So something like the Weihenstephan strain or Global or WLP 830 is popular. My favorite lager yeast strain lately has been the Harvest from Imperial Yeast. I don't think that's available from any other labs at this point. But there's so many different lager yeast strains out there that can be used for this particular style of beer that's going to chew pretty quickly, even at those cooler temps, chew right through that 1035 OG-ish wort.
Yeah, no, you just need a big pitch of healthy yeast and you'll be good to go, man. I think you hit the nail on the head there with Harvest. I think that would be a tremendous strain for this style of beer.
So fermentation isn't going to take very long. It's a low OG beer. I think some people are even the traditionalists out there are okay with, once you give that beer a couple, 2-3 days to really ferment out, to start kind of slowly, gently ramping the temperature just to ensure, full attenuation. And, I think, driving off any of the off flavors that can be created during the fermentation process.
Yeah, a lot of people like to step it up to the low 60s to get that diacetyl rest. Just have the yeast clean up after themselves a little bit.
Right. And I think, you could leave it at that 50 degrees or 48 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 10 degrees Celsius until it completely finishes out. And, for lagers, what can then be done if you're not going to do this diacetyl rest? You've got this maturation or this lagering phase where traditionally what they would do is start to drive down. You might rack that beer into another vessel. And there are multiple things that can occur at this point. You can spund it, you can kreuzen it, you can do all of these things. But the process that I'm aware of, that at least the very traditional process that I'm aware of with German lagers, is what they would do is start to gently ramp that temperature down to basically get it to almost freezing, which is kind of risky with a beer of such low alcohol because it might actually freeze. So I'd say stop at around 1 degree Celsius or 33, 34 degrees Fahrenheit, just to ensure that you don't create a popsicle or a beer sickle, as it were. And the Pistorianus, the lager strains are said to continue to mature that beer during that slow drop in temperature. And then you let the beer lager for however long. I believe, there's some out there who say for every 2 degrees Plato, you let it lager for a week. And so you might let it lager for a month or so, given how low in alcohol this one is, or how low that Plato, that OG really is. And after the lagering phase, the beer should be crystal clear. And if it's not, you let it continue to lager until it is, because this beer is supposed to be crystal clear, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the benefits, I guess, with if you want to maintain these German purity laws, right? You don't have to add any secondary findings. If you just let it lager, it'll be bright.
That's
by the time
right.
You're done.
Well, and that was, I think, in my opinion, that was part of the purpose of lagering in general, was to allow these beers to clear up, because that was sort of the sign of readiness. All of the stuff that is in suspension is now dropped out. This beer is finally ready to drink. There's these various different ways that you might go about, carbonating the beer traditionally and sticking with the Reinheitsgebot, but I don't believe they would allow you to use, forced carbonation, that external CO2, but it should be natural. So they might spund it, which just means capping it off towards the end of fermentation to reuse and recapture some of the CO2 that's naturally produced during fermentation. Then there's krausening as well, which is taking some of the fermenting beer from a newer batch and using that to carbonate the beer that you're working on. The beer is then packaged and served. Did we miss anything in terms of German Leichtbier and the way that it's made, or the ingredients that are used to make it, Phil?
I think we hit most of the major bullet points here.
Yeah, it's not, again, this is a beer that is going to take a little bit of care, at least if you're brewing it in these ways, and is basically the German version of an American light lager, a style often believed to be more difficult to make compared to other lagers and ales. Some might be hesitant to have a go at brewing German Leichtbier. Well, we were interested to see how one would turn out if we broke a bunch of brewing rules. All of that when we're back from this short break. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewer's Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brülosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to grainfather.com, that's grainfather.com, and get started today.
I've got an opinion that I'm guessing is pretty unpopular among homebrewers and craft beer nerds, and it's that most people actually do enjoy the taste of light lagers. I know. Hate mail is totally, we accept it. But the reason is that they say they don't is because of their aberrance for where those beers are made. They allow that to kind of drive their opinion about the quality of the beer. You know, there are those people who will admit that these beers are very difficult to make, but you know, you'd mentioned earlier, Phil, like the fuzzy yellow water thing. That's not a, you know, they're not saying that because they enjoy it. They're saying that as a joke to try to tear it down. At any rate, I have zero shame admitting that I'm a huge fan of light lagers, and I love the idea of producing one with the essence of Germany in it. Phil, for your very first Brülosophy brew, I actually was able to convince you to make a German Leichtbier, short and shoddy style. And I believe, if I'm correct, that this was the first time you'd ever made such a beer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had never had any desire or even like an inkling of a thought of making this style of beer, but then when you presented the idea, I thought it was really fun and novel.
Would you, this is kind of as an aside, would you agree with me that there's, knowing that you're doing this for Brülosophy, like when I go out and I first started doing short and shoddy, I had this little thing in my head going, you know what? It's okay if I screw up because I get to at least share this with people and get feedback. And so there's kind of still some benefit to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely felt a little less pressure on my first Brülosophy brew, being a short and shoddy, because, you know, that's sort of the point. If it fucks up, then like, sorry guys.
Yeah, you told me to do it.
Yeah.
Well, and you had sent me kind of a lightish lager for Jersey and Tim to review, right?
Yeah.
Well, and that was, you know, I'll admit that was part of the reason I wanted you to brew this, because I thought it would be interesting. But there also was another reason, and that was that we needed you were doing an experiment on basically focused on racking wort onto a yeast cake, and we were using that same beer, so you needed to build up a yeast cake, and so this was the way that we decided that you would do that. So anyways, how did you exactly approach brewing this beer in terms of recipe design and thought process in general?
So as far as short and shoddy beers go, I think the general idea is kind of fast and loose, see what happens, but I kind of deviated from that a little bit with this one just because there was an experiment involved down the line. So I perhaps was a little bit more careful than I might be for future short and shoddy brews. That being said, I still kept the grain bill pretty simple. And I also wanted to think about like having a really, really similar style of beer being made for the second experiment, considering that it was going to be, you know, just entirely racked on, or a new batch of wort was being racked onto this yeast cake. So I wanted to maintain that similarity. Aside from that, I went ahead and just did I think it was 91% pale malt or Pilsner. Yeah, so 90.91% or 10 pounds of Pilsner malt, followed by 1 pound or 9.09% Munich malt. And that was just for a little bit more malt bready character from that Munich malt. Yeah, so I had a small bittering addition at the beginning of the boil, and that was just 18 grams of Magnum, German Magnum. And toward the end of the boil was another 28 grams or 1 ounce of Mittelfrüh.
An awesome hop, by the way. That's one of those noble hops that I absolutely love.
Absolutely, yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites as well. The fun thing about this beer is that it was short and shoddy, so everything was abbreviated. So I kind of wanted to do a 30-minute mash, but you convinced me to do 20-minute mash.
You're welcome very much.
As well as a 20-minute boil. So even that first wort hop addition of 18 grams was only in there for 20 minutes in the boil.
Right.
And then the later hop addition was only for 10 minutes. So it's a total of 20 minutes. It's relatively going to be, there's going to be some hop flavors in there, right? Because just based on the timing.
And just to be clear, this one was you mashed this one for 20 minutes as well, right?
Yeah, 20-minute mash, and I mashed at a slightly higher temperature than one might expect for a very light, very crushable beer, and that was a 152 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's an interesting thing, because usually, I think for short and shoddy, people might assume the opposite, that we're going to go way lower than usual. But for a nice, light, crisp beer, the idea is that you want a mash temperature that sort of favors that beta amylase. 152 is kind of near that sweet spot of alpha and beta amylase kind of doing their thing. And I know a lot of people these days, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've read that a lot of people just stick with 154 for pretty much everything. But the idea would be that compared to 148 Fahrenheit, that 152 might produce a beer that doesn't have that crisp character, at least relative to a lower temperature.
Yeah, you might expect that. And so after that 20-minute boil, I chilled it down basically as fast as I could with a somewhat shoddy homemade immersion chiller.
I think it's cute, Phil. You can see the picture over at Brülosophy.com. It's an adorable little immersion chiller that you got there.
That was actually a second prototype. So chilled it down really quickly, and then I did not do any sort of whirlpooling or letting the trube settle. It all just went straight in the fermenter after it was chilled.
Oh, boy.
And from there, it went into my fermentation chamber, or my freezer, where it sat at 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius.
So one of the things about short and shoddy, in my experience, and I do a lot of these short and shoddy brew days because I think they're kind of exciting and fun. But one of the things that I've learned is to adjust my brew house efficiency way low, especially when I'm doing a 20-minute mash. And for me, what that means is like 52% brew house efficiency, which I'm sure a lot of people out there gasp when they hear that. What did you note what your brew house efficiency was on this day? Because you hit a 1035 OG, which is pretty on point for this style.
Yeah, I actually overshot my OG from what I was expecting. So I actually dialed in my efficiency to be 58%, but it was probably closer to the 52% like you got. So I basically way overcompensated with more grain than I thought I was going to need. And I actually hit my target gravity.
Yeah. You nailed it. That's like 1035 OG or 9 degrees bricks. That's really ideal for a American light lager or German Leichtbier, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And worked out really well. So after I placed the fermentation vessel in my freezer, I let it get to the appropriate pitching temp of about 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. And again, this is not exactly the shoddy way to approach this, but this was a little bit more gentle approach for another experiment. So after the wort had chilled to the appropriate temperature, I pitched 1 pack of Urkel by Imperial Yeast, direct pitch into the fermenter. No vitality starter, no yeast starter, no nothing, just straight out of the pack into the fermentation vessel. So after the pitch, there was fermentation activity pretty quickly. I think within a day and a half or so, there was some krausen, definitely after about 36 hours. So I let the beer ride there for about 5 days at 50 degrees. And then at that point, I noticed a little bit of diminishing fermentation. So I started ramping up the temperature and eventually hit 63 degrees Fahrenheit or 17 degrees Celsius. And then after 2 more days at that temperature, I noticed there was no activity, at which point I started to cold crash. So it sat there for about 2 days at, I think it was like 37 degrees. Yeah, 37 degrees Fahrenheit or 3 degrees Celsius, like just above freezing. And from there, I racked into a sanitized keg where it was burst carbonated at 30 psi for about a day and a half. And then it was just reduced to serving pressure. And from there, it lagered for a couple weeks before being served to everybody.
Right. Now, my understanding is this attenuated very quickly in about a week. In about a week's time, this was down to 1007 FG, which means the beer was, if I'm, 1035 to 1007, I think is about 3.5 or 3.7% ABV, something like that. Pretty freaking fantastic for an all malt grain bill, brewed the way that it was, I think.
Yeah. And I don't know. I hate being a fanboy, but I think it's just imperial yeast having really great quality stuff out there, man. It just chewed through it.
That's the thing is that you direct pitch a pack. Now, arguably, it was very fresh yeast. And so that sure. I'm sure made a difference. The fact that it was such low OG. So you even after now this was interesting to me, and I wonder if it's a function of the short and shoddy brewing process. The beer when it went to serving, and we did serve this to blind participants, never really dropped as clear as you'd expect a German Leichtbier to be.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. It was, had a slight haze to it that was stuck around for a while the beer was still fresh. But I will say, as it sat for another period of time, I can't remember how long it took to kick it. Actually, it was pretty quick because it was tasty. But it did gradually get more and more clear as time went on.
And again, as a function of the fact that you were going to be reusing this yeast cake for a subsequent experiment batch, you did not find this beer with gelatin, right?
That is correct, yeah. And normally when I do want these crystal clear lagers, I will gelatin like it's my job. I just like those really bright beers. And this one couldn't do it.
Yeah, well, and I love how Ray refers to gelatin. He calls it powdered thyme. And,
Right.
You're serving these beers, a week and a half, basically, in the keg. You didn't allow for that traditional lagering phase. And you didn't do anything, with the exception of, I think, maybe some Whirlflock in the kettle.
Yes.
You didn't do anything else to find this beer. And so, considering that, I think it looks decent. I mean, it's definitely more hazy than I think I would consider appropriate for the style. So there's maybe one slight ding about the short and shoddy brewing method. Now, I don't know if that's a function of the short and shoddy process, but I have heard from a few people who have abbreviated their mash steps and don't engage in any finding processes who experience the same thing, that there's something about that 20 to 30 minute mash rest that may have some sort of an impact on ultimate clarity of the beer as opposed to, beers that are mashed at 60 minutes or longer. I really don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I never thought about it that way, but I'll have to think about it some more. Maybe do an experiment. Who knows?
Yeah, honestly, we always good to replicate these mash length experiments. So once the beer was ready to drink, Phil, you served it to a group of blind participants, the results of which we'll get to after I tell you about Brewers Hardware, who are excited to introduce their new BH15 pilot system, a fully customizable turnkey rig that utilizes a hard plumb manifold to make brewing more efficient by eliminating all hosing changes. And right now you can get the BH15 or any other pilot brewing system shipped for free. To learn more, call or visit brewershardware.com. And don't forget to mention Brülosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. So of these 19, the first question that we ask them is, this is a really, really tough question, way more difficult than I think some readers presume. But the first question is, what beer style do you think this is? And that's it. And we make them kind of go through a list of all the BJCB beer styles and try to pick the one they think it is. So it's not easy. It's not as easy as some people like to think it is. And so for that,
not.
Yeah, it's so difficult. The fact that 6 out of the 19 people you served this to thought it was a Kolsch isn't all that surprising to me. And then altogether, if you look at kind of the pale lager-ish types of styles, you've got American light lager, 2 people thought it was that. International pale lager, somebody thought it was that. Somebody thought it was a Czech pale lager. And then the 6 people who thought it was a Kolsch.
Somebody thought it was a pre-prohibition lager as well, which was interesting.
Well, and I also think that a part of the reason you don't see anybody selecting German Leichtbier is that not many people really know what that is,
No one knows what it is. Yeah,
Exactly.
It's amazing.
So, and that's not to say that if they did, that they would think that this was it. Now, one of the comments that a few people commented on, Kolsch, that has to do with the warm fermentation temperature, to which I was able to respond, we didn't ferment this one warm, so it can't be that,
Right.
That was one of the, and you had mentioned earlier, that was one of the kind of the non-short and shoddy things that you did only because you would be reusing this yeast. You wanted to treat it well. But I don't think that's what it is. To me, what I think it is the middle fruit hops do have this element, this really nice, subtle, floral, fruity thing going on. And you used about an ounce of it at 10 minutes left in the boil, right?
Yeah, exactly that. Yep.
So that's kind of my presumption, but still, the beer style selection was kind of decently on point. One person thought it was a saison, another person thought it was a wit beer. I'm not sure where these things come from, but
the goes really got me too. That I don't know what to say about that.
There's no salt, there was no coriander, it wasn't sour. I don't get it, but that's one of those questions that I still struggle with keeping on the survey, but we do it because I think it's interesting. The next question had to do with the average characteristics, hoppy, malty, and kind of the yeast or the fermentation characteristic.
So the style characteristics or the beer characteristics looked like most of the people thought it was dry / attenuated, followed by malty, and then very few people thought it was hoppy. And I think those descriptions are pretty much right in line with what the style should be.
Totally. Does it align with what you thought the beer tasted like?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, that makes perfect sense to me as well. Nice, dry, crisp beer that has a more malt character than hop character. Fits right in with my expectations. Now, in terms, we asked the participants to kind of break down the characteristics for hop, malt, and yeast character as well. And you look at hop characteristics. The two that tied for the highest ratings were earthy and spicy, followed by piney, kind of like a pine resinous thing, and floral, as well as a touch of fruity, and neither of those really stole the show, but it does make sense to me again for the style, considering the types of hops that were used, that spicy and earthy would kind of win out in that. And I think totally expected, 12 out of 19 people thought that cracker bread crust was the most prominent malt characteristic.
Sure, yeah.
And that makes sense, right? You're using a lot of Pilsner malt with a little bit of that Munich malt in there as well to kind of add a little bit of depth to the malt flavor. 3 people put toasty and a couple of people put nutty. One person put kind of caramelly and sweet. I think that all fits in. In fact, in the BJCP characteristics, their guidelines, in their description of this style, they put kind of a grainy, sweet characteristic in the malt for the malt is perfectly appropriate.
Yeah, no, I thought these were spot on as well. I was happy to see those results.
Now, for some reason, when asked about yeast character or fermentation characteristics, this question always yields some of the most curious responses. You had 3 people endorse phenolic as being the most prominent character. Another 3 people endorsed wild, which would kind of suggest like a contamination. Mm-hmm. I'm taking your word for it that those characteristics weren't there, but it's curious to me that those would get selected.
To me, I didn't get anything like that, but I guess who am I to say that they weren't there?
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's the best we can say, I guess. Now, a good majority of people, 7 people, or a plurality at least, did endorse clean. Another 3 people put sulfur, which makes sense. Some lager beers definitely have that sulfur characteristic to them. And a couple people thought that there were some esters present. Again, I'm kind of wont to believe that might be a function of the types of hops used, but maybe they were there. Who knows? All right. So in terms of preference, what did these tasters think about the beer before knowing what it was?
Looks like people were pretty much middle of the road. There were 7 people who rated it as a 3 out of 5, followed by 5 people who rated it both as a 2 and a 1 out of 5. And then there was 1 person who rated it as 4 out of 5. So I think to me that's dead in the middle.
Yeah. It also doesn't surprise me, given the kind of consensus among beer drinkers about light lagers in general, I guess. It's kind of for many, it's just kind of a boring style. It's light. It's not super hoppy. It's not high in alcohol. And all we're doing on this one, we're not saying how good was it. We're saying, what did you, personally, did you prefer this? Rate it 1 out of 5 or 0 out of 5, really. So to me, the 7 out of 19 people saying that it was a 3 out of 5 perfectly makes sense, at least in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just glad nobody hated it. That's cool.
Well, they didn't tell you they hated it. That's
right. That's right. Yeah.
And then once the style was actually revealed to these participants, we asked them again. It's not like they all knew exactly what a German Leichtbier was, but we did ask them to rate it in terms of how representative it was of the target style. And 8 out of 19 people put a 3 out of 5. Another 4 people thought it was a 4 out of 5. One person thought it represented it exactly. I'm assuming that person is familiar with German Leichtbier. I don't know. And then, 3 people thought it was a 2 out of 5. Nobody put 0. 2 people put that it was a 1 out of 5. So pretty interesting results. Again, kind of middle of the road. People thought it was fairly representative. Though that could be completely a function of the fact that they just don't know what German Leichtbier really is.
And that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, yeah. So Phil, tell us about your impressions of this beer. What did you think of it?
My impressions were, I thought it was, I don't want to say spot on for what it should have been, but I thought it was pretty close to what a German Leichtbier should be. It was clean, it was crisp, it was dry. Actually, I thought it was a little bit more off dry than dry. But it definitely had some present bitterness, but it wasn't too bitter like the German Pils would be. And the hop flavor was there, but it was more subtle than again the German Pils would be.
Yeah.
So I slammed those beers down pretty quickly. And actually, I think I texted you and the rest of the crew that after my first sampling of this beer, it was like one of my favorites that I've ever made because it was just really, really good.
That's awesome. I've made a lot of these short and shoddy, traditional lager style beers. And like you, they come back surprisingly good, in my opinion. I do think there's an element to knowing the process that sort of does influence our perspectives on the beers that we're making. Some of us are our own worst critic, whereas some of us refuse to accept that we sometimes make shit beer.
Yes.
But with these,
I think another element would be like everybody loves their own kids, right? So you're gonna be biased to like your own beer.
Yeah, no, exactly. But is there anything about the short and shoddy brewing process? This was your first time engaging in this full-fledged short and shoddy process, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So was there anything, your entire brew day, you mashed for 20 minutes, you boiled for 20 minutes, and I believe you told me it was just under 2 hours from start to finish.
Yeah, it was amazing. Fastest brew day I've ever had. Because normally when I'm using my regular gear and I have everything all ready and set to go, like I can get everything done in like 4.5 hours. So this is like less than half that.
Yeah.
So it was pretty great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was there anything about the finished beer when you were tasting it and kind of thinking back on it now that you might change about the short and shoddy process, things that you might do differently in the future? The one thing I'm looking at, the one thing that it sounds like you might do is maybe fine it with gelatin to kind of encourage that clarity a bit quicker.
Yeah, to quote, did you say it was Ray? Yeah, give me that liquid time, man. I'm all about it. So I do that, and I would perhaps maybe, I don't know, I would probably use a little bit more hops, a little bit more spicy hops in the finish, just because I thought I could have used some more. I would also tweak the mineral additions, maybe just throw something else in, because all I did for this one was carbon filter the water, and that was it. And the last time I took a water report or sent a water report to the laboratory was like, I think 7 months prior to this, and that was during the winter, so I'm sure the profile was vastly different. But yeah, I would definitely tweak with the water a little bit. Yeah,
that's one of those things too that I feel like I'm always chasing the best water profile for a style, and kind of knowing that I may not be going back to that style again. It's like, how much effort do I want to put into making this the perfect water,
Mm-hmm. But even with these short and shotties, maybe I would just like toss in a handful of something, see how it goes.
I know, honestly, for a style like this, I'd probably just use maybe straight gypsum and leave out calcium chloride or magnesium sulfate, something like that. One thing that we failed to talk about was the off flavors. Now, when you're mashing for 20 minutes and boiling for 20 minutes and then fermenting the way you did, you did do a diacetyl rest, I guess, and you did ferment nice and cool. But there's, the fear that you're going to create certain off flavors, particularly with a 20-minute boil, dimethyl sulfide, which one person, 5 people in total identified off flavors. One person detected DMS. 2 felt that there was a diacetyl component. Another couple thought that there was some acetaldehyde. Very little consistency in terms of this. And, maybe there were essences of these, or the tasters who identified them are sensitive to those particular compounds, but sounds to me like you didn't pick any of that up.
I did not. And I think you might have been closer to what actually happened in saying that like maybe some of those ester characters were like hop derived.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, to my palate, I got no DMS, no diacetyl, no acetaldehyde.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was nothing.
Yeah, I also think that people are kind of a little bit when we're really digging into something and evaluating the beer, we kind of look for things.
Right. Yeah, and I think sometimes we feel like we need to give feedback like that because we're being asked to.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So who knows?
So, Phil, final question: would you brew another short and shoddy German Leichtbier?
I probably would. Yeah. No, I'd give it a go.
I definitely am going to do it. I'm really excited to. I've been kind of on a hiatus. I just outfitted my garage with 220 volt, two separate circuits of 220 volt electricity, which means that I had to tear down and tear out all of my natural gas stuff. So I'm left unable to brew right now. And one of the first things that I plan to brew once I get my system going, just kind of try it out, is a short and shoddy version of a Leichtbier because it just sounds so delicious. Well, that is all the time that we've got. If you'd like to read more about the stuff that we discussed in this episode, as well as all of our other experimental projects, you can do that at Brülosophy.com. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.